evening. Happy close to August, which in Dallas area means it's going to get darn hot. So we'll start off our ambient sensing conversation about the weather. That's important because I'm getting ready to tell you who I am, and I'm a country kid from Iowa, and that's how you start every conversation. That's the weather. If you're farm folk, you know that. If you're ag tech, you know it's all about the weather. So, yeah, my name is Rachael Ridenour. I am currently the CTO / co-founder of a company called CoreSense Solutions. I'm a passionate nerd, technologist, and I have used to be a paramedic in another life and a military veteran. So getting things in the hands of people as far upstream as possible to make a difference for diagnosis and treatment is something really important to me because I've been a technologist all my life. I'd go to CDS for my day job, and then I'd sneak over to the AI and the health tech piece. So this is a space I've been tracking for about 10 years. That being said, raise your hands if you know everything there is to know about AI. So, you know, what was it? Was it Moore's Law, right? Every 7 years, I think, or 7 years. Again, I'm not an engineer. I'm a technologist. I'm a data scientist. I'm a nerd. I think in the AI world, it's almost every 6 months. And in the sensor world, it's much like the AI world, where we see radical changes and papers being published almost every single month. In fact, there's one that came up today that was incredibly interesting. So I do not have all the answers, which is why having a lively discussion, I think, a lot of experts in this room with a lot of experience in this room. And I am very much hoping to take some nuggets back from you, and I hope that I'm able to share with you. I'm going to do something very dangerous at the end, and I'm going to try and make some predictions, which is always fun. But I'm going to wiggle out and not give you an end date. That's when I think these predictions occur. So that's kind of who I am and why I'm standing up here. Got to tell you what we're going to talk about today. So, and this is mostly to keep me on space because I could go for 8 hours talking about sensors and AI and healthcare. So we're going to talk a little bit about history and context. That's important because I'm a systems thinker. There's a lot of systems thinkers in this space. And I want you to understand that we're going to talk about healthcare sensors tonight, but I would argue there's a lot of overlap with sensors and IoT in general. We're at the convergence, this inflection. It's going to rapidly accelerate, I would argue, here over the next decade in how we interact with our spaces. We're talking about the body as a sensor. How many of you have a smartwatch that you wear, a Fitbit, a Whoop? Awesome. So I used to say the only thing that I would forget when I walked out of the house that I would turn around and go get if I forgot were my keys. Then it became my smartphone, and now it's my smartwatch, right? So these tools have become things that we rely on. And I would argue that one of the reasons, this is the data science side, you're going to hear this a lot tonight, one of the reasons why we need some transformation in this space is because there's too much data and not enough action. But when your Apple Watch tells you only have to get up for a 12-minute walk to close a loop, or your Fitbit says, maybe your neighbor walked, half a kilometer or half a mile more than you did, we've got that competition. And the data insights that these tools have the potential to provide can actually drive action. That's what's important. It's not about noise. It's about signal that turns into actionable insights. We'll talk about the body as a sensor and where that's going. And we'll talk about ambient sensing, which I would predict is where a lot of this is going to go to because there's inherent challenges with wearables right now, especially in healthcare space. Anybody here ever hear this thing called COVID?
Yeah.
How many of you got up out of bed to go recharge your smartwatch and ran out of battery? When you're sick, the last thing you want to do is make sure your wearable is functioning. That's exactly the time that you need it most to collect important data, right? So ambient sensing is definitely a pathway for you to see more. Then we'll talk about the future, and then I'm hoping as a group we can really have a really good discussion on some of the ethics, some of the challenges, and some of the limitations that's in the space right now where we see collectively as a professional group where those are going. The ethics piece, I think things are moving so fast that ethics can't begin to compete. Things like how do you get informed consent from a 90-year-old who doesn't even understand what AI is? Right? These are real issues. Any questions on that? All right, and we've all got smartphones? Excellent. Well, before we jump into the good stuff, pop quiz. If you're willing to play the game, if you hold your smartphone up, your camera, hit that QR code. It's going to take you to a real quick Microsoft form. 5 simple questions. You get to vote. You'll list 5 devices, whether you think they're real, if they're currently being developed, or if they are not real. output it. Give me a second to do that. And then we'll reveal the answers at the end. And I brought all the sources just in case there's disbelief.
They were AI generated.
Of course, yes. Don't fact check. I did fact check all 5. Inquiring minds want to know. And people online, hopefully they contribute to the knowledge base too. I am generally curious how many people really track health data, health sensors, and kind of see where is the baseline here for what things are being created.
Number 5 to tell me about microstress. I don't pick up the other signal.
Yeah. Is detecting stress useful? Right?
All academics.
Yeah. Yeah.
Listen.
All right. So before I roll to the next slide, would anyone like to hazard a guess at what sort of the first legitimate healthcare sensor would be when it was created? Thermometer. Excellent. First analog, it's credited as the first analog real health sensor. Is the thermometer, the old-fashioned thermometer. Any guess when that was actually invented? Ish.
1907. I was thinking 1631.
So early 1700s is what it's credited for.
When?
Early 1700s, 1714. Now, you can argue that the Tesla versus, oh my gosh, whether electricity generating producer, Tesla versus Edison. Thank you. On whether or not this gentleman really gets the credit, but it is Gabriel Fahrenheit in 1714 has credit for it. Followed 100 years later by the stethoscope, which again is analog, right? It's just measuring the acoustic sounds, the heart and the lungs. And then the sphygmomanometer, which we usually call blood pressure cuff, right? Came in the late 1800s. Bonus points if you can place the sensor that I put in the bottom of the screen, affectionately labeled.
Tricorder. Yeah.
The tricorder.
What's that?
What's that used for, right? You have to be a Star Trek fan. The tricorder is the box that you could walk up to that could analyze and diagnose all of your ailments. So we're not quite there yet, but getting between the 1700s to the tricorder, it's not a fast process. But the point is that healthcare sensors aren't new. Biohacking is not new. Humans have been trying to diagnose the human body for probably all of humanity, right? And creating the tools. And we live in a very exciting time that I think you're going to see this fundamentally shape healthcare, fundamentally reshape our healthcare system. And just there are a lot of different sensor types that you, at a very macro level. You can group them just by the type of signal or data that they measure. And I would argue that you're seeing changes and amazing progress in almost every single one of these. Electrical, biochemical, thermal, acoustic, gas and chemical is really progressing right now, although there are some limitations in the ability for these really tiny sensors to measure the right parts per million of the sensitivity of the hardware isn't quite there yet. So they're making fundamental breakthroughs, but we have some physical limitations right now that hopefully will accelerate it here with all of the AI being used in manufacturing right now. And then mechanical, which I don't know how many sports fans are in here. Do you have any idea how many sensors are in an average professional football team's gear? It's in their shoulder pads, it's in their shoes, it's in their helmets, like to measure every different kind of impact torque used not only to diagnose for better play, but also be able to help treatment when somebody's had an injury to give them the best chance to get back and forth. They can see where the force came from. It's crazy. And I'm sure that'll trickle down into it's probably already trickled into high school sports and probably get into elementary sports here not too long. So the point being, it's not new. So why not? Why now, right? What is this convergence that I'm talking about, right? Because the tools are ready and the infrastructure is ready. There's a lot of folks in this room who have personally worked in the telecom industry, right? So having IoT as a thing to push data up to a centralized location like a smartphone or a smartwatch or a cloud. So we've got the maturity of the sensor technology, the connectivity and the infrastructure, and satellite and 5G. 5G really isn't 5G yet, right? It will be. It's going to be mindful of what that helps us do with data on the edge, with edge computing and fog computing. And then the AI and the analytic capability is just absolutely exploding with not just generative AI, but object detection modules and natural language processing. The era of agentic AI is coming. There's also a shift to value-based and preventative care. So we're going to see the diagnosis and the ability to intervene in disease come much further upstream, right? So if you think about it, this is going to be one of the profound, from the data world, one of the profound changes over the next 20 years is that if you think about it, the vast majority of healthcare data that we are doing clinical research with, that we are trying to decide if you are sick or healthy or borderline, the vast majority of it is sick data. You don't go to the hospital and get your vital signs collected when you're well. But we are in the part of an amazing era from a data collection standpoint where we are generating a concept called personally generated health data, right? That's what your smartwatch does. Personally generated health data. With the ability to capture wellness data, right? Not just sick data, so that you can start to do comparative analytics is insane. And hopefully, but there are limitations. We'll get into that. One of those ladies being, for those of you who don't know, did you know that women were not required to be in clinical trials until 1993? So there are decades of drug research that were never actually tried clinically on women because biologically it gets pretty messy. We have variances in temperatures and some other things that happen once a month that complicate sex. So it's easier just to leave this out. So all this wellness data, we're going to get access to robust data sets are going to get created. I would argue, yeah, the data going into causation and cause analysis and correlation is going to be much, much more robust because the data sets will exist that don't exist today. And by the way, people are just demanding it. We are being proactive with our health as we live longer, right? And COVID-19 showed people they could do a whole lot and it accelerated some of the home test kit technologies and some of the other studies that occurred clinically. For instance, one of the studies that occurred they had 6,000 patients that used 3 different smartwatches, and 62% of the patients that eventually the records show that they had COVID, the smartwatch detected COVID in some cases 9 days before people started showing symptoms because of heart rate variability and some other things that happen. So the ability to, even if you don't even know you're sick yet, something send you a warning. So people are, now that they've seen and had a taste of it, there's an ownership. And wearables have been normalized, and we've got that post-COVID vigilance. Plus, it just takes too doggone long to get into to see your general provider, right? So if I can figure it out on my own and not have to wait in line to be seen. So, all right, so the body is the sensor. So we talked about the smartwatches. Anybody do the Aura ring or the EV ring? It's another real big one. I have really immense respect for Aura and what they've tried to do in terms of data sharing with the community. They routinely give data away for clinical research. All you have to do is ask for it, and they actually had a request from a research agency or for a very specific thing, put out a call to their users, and in like 30 days had like 30,000 data sets of this one very specific thing that this research team was trying to, they just donated. They gave that information away. So we're familiar with the smartwatches and the passive sort of things, but we're definitely moving into an era of biological feedback. This is really interesting. And all these things are here right now today. I'm sure you've seen, or if you haven't seen, the continuous glucose patches that you can get prescribed, and you hold your smartphone up that you're able to take a look at. And then just Dexcom just rolled that out. There's two companies that even if you don't have diabetes, you can just sign up for it and they'll send you a patch and you can subscribe so you can monitor your own glucose proactively because you're worried about diabetes when you're pre-diabetic. That's an example of a biochemical wearable. There's several others. Biochemical wearables are really blowing up. And it's important, and I probably should have made the point, to delineate that there are really two broad categories of healthcare sensors, right? We have wellness sensors, and then we have I'm really sick, and maybe I'm in a hospital kind of sensors, right? So for instance, 50 megabytes an hour is what an ICU bed generates on average for one patient. 50 megabytes of data for an ICU bed right now, right?
Is that per hour?
Per hour. Per hour. I can do the math and figure out the terabytes, but I haven't.
Where's that data stored?
It's a great question. It's a lot of things. It's a lot of things, and it's stored in a lot of different places. And security is going to continue to be a problem as we move more and more pre-hospital with this data collection. And where is it going to be stored?
Long-term storage.
Long-term storage. And who's responsible for that storage? Right? These are important questions that we don't have answers to yet. Voice and breath analysis. So voice analysis, they can actually tell changes in altered mental status by listening. This right here, I don't know if anybody's familiar with Lumen. This is just a breath analyzer. I use it, kind of a workout nut. You blow into it, and what it tells me is if I'm burning fat or if I'm burning carbohydrates. 10 years ago, this was a $60,000 test that I had to go do in a hospital that I can use multiple times a day with an app on my phone. So it tells me with intermittent fasting, if you're fasting too long, if I'm getting ready to go lift weights, I want to be burning carbs, not fat, because I want to actually gain mass, not just lose mass, right? So this is a great example of a consumer breath analyzer called Lumen. This is not a paid sponsorship ad. Yes, sir.
So I have a question.
Yes.
Is that a medical device?
That is a great question. So I'm sure the manufacturer is going to tell you no. It's a recommendation engine. But
Well, no. It being a medical device or not is a very specific legal statement. And so is it or is it not?
So I don't know on this particular one, but I'll tell you that there's an evolution of something that's been FDA approved. There's a difference between FDA approval and FDA cleared, right? FDA cleared means, FDA approved means you've gone through all the hoops and the clinical trials. And by the way, software now is considered a medical device. On these things, on these AI algorithms, the FDA is now considering. So software has to get FDA approved. FDA cleared is a device that is using something that's already been FDA approved. So it's considered, it's not a diagnostic tool, it's lower risk. So I suspect this is probably FDA cleared, but it's an evolution that you'll see FDA approved in a hospital system that then becomes a prosumer tool that then becomes a consumer. Right. So if you think about where did, measuring blood pressure, and then stethoscope to measure heart rate to now having this thing on your list. So it really comes down to diagnostics versus recommendation. Does that make sense? And it's evolving. It's evolving very quickly. But really good question. There also, I think it was today, from obviously this is a consumer sports wellness tool. But
What's the price point of that?
It's 200.
Is it 200? Okay, I've had it for a couple of years, and I got it on a Black Friday special. Buy this, get that. So 200. Okay. I would argue it's priceless when you try and get your body into it. Getting metabolic flexibility is a really important marker for longevity and health, right? And as someone who's an Army reservist who has to take a PT test with a bunch of 18-year-olds, making sure I can lift do my deadlift and run and do all this thing is save my butt. I'm ready to work out and take some more carbs here before I
Okay, so now you made me ask another question.
Yes, sir.
Does an individual calibrate that device for their self?
So it comes, so it's a hardware software solution in this particular case. And I would argue for most of these breath and voice analysis as well. You have to have the hardware to listen and or blow into the device. And then you also have to have the software that tells you, contextualizes it based on, I'm sure, your age, your gender, and some of the things. I don't have the insight into the software behind that particular one.
Well, so, okay, so I want to make the same question easier. If you decided to, could you and your husband use the same device?
And we do. We have 2 separate accounts, 2 separate apps.
Okay, and so in the apps, is it calibrated for that individual user?
Correct. On my app, it knows that it's me with my demographic data blowing through the tube. On my partner's app, it's the same. Oh, great. And Lumen is not FDA approved and not considered a medical device. It's designed to provide personalized nutritional guidance, not to diagnose.
Excellent.
Awesome. But the question, and that's great. Thank you for looking that up. The question becomes, at what point, as you aggregate sensors, does it become a diagnostic tool, right? So,
I disagree. I don't think you would find a working medical professional that would consider something a diagnostic tool if it was not an actual approved medical device. And that's a legal thing. It's not about how good the engineering is.
exactly.
It's about, have you gone through the legal steps?
Yes.
And so if you're a doc, you're at great risk if you're using devices for diagnostics that are not.
Yeah, a doctor wouldn't use this for a diagnostic tool, right? As an individual, I would use this as a data point that tells me maybe, and for me, this is a wellness thing, but if I'm doing everything right and my metabolism just isn't flexing between carb burn, fat burn, and the Lumen probably isn't the best device. Like maybe my smartwatch is a better device, right? Where all of a sudden I'm standing here and I get an elevated heart rate warning. And all of a sudden I'm tachycardic. I've got a heart rate that's at 150. Right? If that happens over a series of days or several times a month, as an individual, I may decide it's time for me to go talk to my GP and say, hey, I'm getting these weird alerts that say I'm having cardiac arrhythmias. So again, there's many different categories, but I would argue this is still a health sensor, right? It's still an indicator. But good questions and good comments. And remember, this started as a diagnostic tool in a hospital that is a very big machine, and I forget the name of it. But even today, Mike Allen back there in the back, he works with me, because again, stuff's coming out every single day. There was an announcement for a device that you could blow into that diagnoses cancer. It just got cleared to be the next stage of clinical research.
Which company?
There's a lot of them pursuing it. I'd have to go back and look. I know there's a lot of things that, so your breath can tell a lot of things. That there are lots of companies are trying to figure out ways to measure those things. So cancer screening is certainly one of them that they're trying to work on right now. So, smart contact lenses. This is crazy. Smart contact lenses. They can do all kinds of things. One of the things that they've realized is that if you put eye drops in your eyes, how much of the medicine goes out of your eye? So some of the smart contact lenses, they've actually been experimenting with actually doing drug delivery in microdosing because it's very efficient and it gets it right into the eye. The other thing they're doing is tears are a really interesting source of diagnostics that mimic in a lot of ways human blood. So with things like diabetes, they can measure your glucose levels inside your eye based on your tears, depending on the type of tear. So smart contacts are actually being tested right now. As for continuous glucose monitoring, again, aging population, throw a stat out here that won't surprise some of us, but may surprise others. 2020, 16% of the US population was 65 and older. By 2030, 24% of the US population will be age 65 or older. So one of the things they found, continuous glucose monitors, those patches, become very uncomfortable on aging skin. right? So if you can get a continuous glucose monitor in something like a compact that doesn't have to have that sticky adhesive, that's another answer for an aging population where skin starts to really thin out as you get older. All right, neurotech. Anybody use any tools at home? Any biohackers in here that use some neurotech? No. So here's one called Mendy. This is again a wearable that you put on your forehead, connects to an app on your phone, and it measures brainwaves. It can figure out and helps you train your brain to do certain things, meditate, and do some other things. This is one of many examples. Again, I'm a nerd and I'm into health tech, so Black Friday I always pick up a few more of these tools. I'd like to tell you I'm really practiced with it. The app was underwhelming. I probably need to spend more time with it, but I have it.
I'm just kind of curious. Were those always? Yeah, I've seen some other things where you listen to the music and it's. How do you know it's doing the right thing? That was always that they weren't programming me to do something.
Right.
I'll kill somebody.
Yeah. So I think looking at the science, right? Look at the science and the clinical studies and what the tech is based on in educating consumer, right? Hypnotism. I'm giving it, and that's one of the questions we're going to talk about here at the end is, the body has an API, who gets access to that? How do you control your privacy and the security of that data and where it goes? So this is a very simple form factor. It's very uncomfortable after a longer amount of time, but you're seeing these things get woven into textiles now. Headbands, you can run with them. They're soft and stretchy. And VR is a big part of how sensors are getting embedded into clothing, in my opinion. Because then you can do all kinds of things without hardware. Just put clothes on and you can replicate some of the impacts. So some of that technology early on is now getting pushed into the health tech space as well.
What's the cost on that?
I'm going to guess probably about 200 as well. Yes, it's called Mendy. I don't even know if they're still in business, to be honest. I've had that for probably over a year. I bought it for a friend who did it back. It might be wonderful. I don't want to discount it. I'm not, nothing negative. I haven't invested the time to know the tool. I just thought it'd be cool to all right, next one is skin-mounted tattoos. What the heck is that? Anybody heard of these? I think this is one of the coolest ones that's currently being used. And the reason why I think it's cool is because I'm a big believer in our hometown favorites. So just a shout out to Dr. Lou, who's down at the in Austin, who actually has one of the honestly a world-breaking lab down there, and they're doing all kinds of crazy cool stuff. The one on the right that shows the chest is actually a printable circuit board that you can just print out and stick. And what it's monitoring for is pneumonia for patients. So you can change the size, what you need for an infant versus what you need for an adult versus what you need for a male or a female is really kind of cool. The second one on the left is they're printing circuits that go onto the head, shave the head, you print the circuits out, one-time use, stick it on the patient, attach the leads, done, it all goes away. And then
What does that accomplish?
There's a lot of things that they're looking at, EEG scanning for neural, like head trauma, closed head trauma, looking at neurons that are firing, whatever the hospital would normally need to. Sometimes they'll put a skull cap on, but again, think the evolution, right? So you've got the big hospital usage, then the prosumer, then the consumer, right? So if you look at if this is what's being done deep into the hospital in 10 years, can you have a 3D printer or a printer in the back of an ambulance that can quickly print a circuit, select it to a person, and do a diagnostic on the fly? Right? If you think about the evolution of how that technology and what that kind of represents. So we're still very much in the early stages of this stuff. But just printing a circuit on something that's stretching and flexible and being able to apply it. They also have some that are really cool, like the stress marker, the tattoos that will change color if certain proteins are detected. So you can basically print out a digital tattoo, apply it, and then in the hospital setting, if certain proteins emerge, I'm not a doctor, I don't remember what the proteins are, but it has the ability to change colors based on interaction.
There's a lot of medical research on Sweat, because of all the chemical compounds, and I'm sure that's what it's,
Yeah, sweat as well.
yeah, because there's different proteins.
There's different proteins, there's different stress markers. There's a lot of stuff that comes out of sweat. So I wanted to spend a little more time on that. So that's kind of the interacting with the body becoming a sensor itself, right? It's not just putting, right now we think about health sensors as something you put on. You go to the hospital, they put on your blood pressure cuff. They stick something, a pulse ox on your finger, right? What I just showed is your body is a sensor where these things are becoming more and more integrated, like continuous glucose monitoring, like a smart contact that can check ocular pressure and do certain things. But now, again, the problem with your body is that human bodies can be very unpredictable. We move, we get wet, we sweat, we rub and carry, we put things on. So the problem is, long term, a lot of times sensors fall off, or they're not worn the right way. Maybe my watch is loose. I don't like it when I go to sleep, so unconsciously I take it off. So ambient health sensing is an area that is really cool. And I saw, it's one of the things I think I'll nerd out, and I can never remember the daggone name of the company out of the UK, and I wrote it down because I got awful marketing because I can never remember the daggone name. It's the, I'll pull it up. But anyway, they use radar and LiDAR tracking. So this is really cool. So this image right here in the upper left side, basically it looks exactly like a little light that sits on your nightstand that you can leave in your bedroom. It uses radar and LiDAR to detect micro vibrations. And while you're sleeping or walking around the room, it can do everything from fall detection to blood pressure, heart rate variability. And all it's doing is it's an ambient sensing that just stays in your room because it's radar and LiDAR. It goes through furniture, it goes through walls potentially, and it's able to go ahead and collect that health data passively, biometric data passively. Yes, sir.
So we've been told for a couple of decades now that our smartphones are giving us cancer because of radiation. Whether that's real or not, I don't know. But that sounds like a nightmare scenario based on what they're telling us about smartphones. Because it's another RF device that's radiating at somebody.
As is your smart car.
Yeah.
Right. As is probably the smart airplane. Now this one is FDA approved, and it's the first FDA approved of that kind that I've seen. And again, it's a UK company. It's like Guardian. It's a two-name word that I won't pull out, but it's really, really interesting what they're doing. But yes, it is FDA approved. I don't know what the clinical trials are for a radar, LiDAR, micro vibration device. And that's where longitudinal testing with all this stuff is going to be really important moving forward.
Is rate variability just kind of like exploded in sophistication in the last, I'm going to say 3 years? Yeah. I looked for a watch with that and found it to be very disappointing.
So, well, heart rate variability is a very important metric at health. So heart rate variability is literally the statistical anomaly of the variability of your heart. What is the range? And there are entire problems with, again, I'll jump ahead because it's important. There's no common data model for any of this. So the first question is, what Apple measures and what Garmin measures may not even be comparable units of analysis, right? One may measure your heart every 1 second, the other one may measure it every 5 seconds. So already I've got apples to oranges, and I've got to have some kind of ability to convert that into a common unit of measurement before I can even start to look at it longitudinally, right? Because you may go from an apple to a Garmin to a book in your lifetime. Or how do I compare my medical grade gold standard for heart rate with my personally generated health data? What is the standard deviation between the gold standard and in medicine, the gold standard, the blood pressure cuff is the gold standard for your blood pressure, right? The thermometer is the gold standard for temperature, whereas an infrared thermometer, which is passive, we know that it's off roughly half a degree, right? So it's a half. So, but I know that because there's lots of testing that's been done, so I can tell you confidently that an infrared thermometer is about a half a degree less accurate than an actual thermometer, right? So
But we've also found out recently that 98.6, gold standard of what the median temp should be, is widely inaccurate because of the tools that we have.
and because of where we decided to collect our population level data.
And that data is a very old data.
And it's a very old data set. And your body temperature, they figured out, actually changes at different decades, different aging points.
That data not.
Well, so there's bias in all the data sets. The ugly truth is a lot of our medical goals, but our national population data for what's normal, a lot of it came from data that was collected in concentration camps, right? So we haven't had the ability to have the collection volume and velocity that we have in today's environment, which is what makes this so exciting if you're a data nerd or you're really interested in advancing medicine understanding. But the other challenge with heart rate variability is these are still businesses, and there's a food fight right now in the patenting space. So who owns the patent for the handheld device that measures heart rate variability? So like Garmin, well, I think it's been a while since I dug into that one. I think it's Apple owned it, so Garmin had to remove it. But there are devices and there are ways that you can measure heart rate variability. The heart rate itself is a very clean metric for most of these personal devices. They spend a lot of time on heart rate and heart rate variability, to be honest. But what they're able to show you is not necessarily what they're able to do. There are constraints because of FDA approval, because of fears being labeled as a diagnostic tool. There are challenges right now that I hope we're able to overcome a lot more R&D. Smart toilets. Yes, they're a real thing. Imagine that your COVID knew that you had COVID before you did. And by the way, it's not just individual smart toilets. We've been using public sanitation during the COVID epidemic. In fact, I think it was in California. They set up sensors to detect COVID-19 at wastewater facilities, and they were able to detect by zip code when things were spiking. So then they took targeted outreach, put little messages on the door handles, radio announcements, sent messages to telephones just in those neighborhoods to say, hey, it's spiking. Here's the precautions that you can take. That's something that's been in use for a while, but getting it into your own home where you're literally measuring your urine and your fecal for things like hydration, bacteria, proteins, blood sugar is pretty amazing. Smart mirrors. Smart mirrors. Anybody have a smart mirror?
How about the thing on the side of your house?
The thing on the side of your house.
Yes.
Give me a little bit more, Tom.
Well, they came out there one day and they took out this mechanical mirror. Oh, mirror. I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you said.
Oh,
Not
that's
very
okay.
mirror anywhere.
Smart mirror. So again, passive ambient monitoring. You step up in the morning, you're going to brush your teeth, or maybe you're just checking to make sure that you got your shirt on right side in and inside right. And it can do things like use remote photo PPG sensing, right? So on the back of your smartwatch or your smart ring, you've got that green light, right? That's PPG sensing. You can actually do remote PPG sensing through a color camera. It measures the same red, green, blue pixels in a color photo and can measure things like heart rate variability, and to a very limited extent, blood pressure. So smart mirrors they're experimenting with to look for things like that.
So the Sinclair Hotel in Fort Worth, every hotel room has a smart mirror, not for medical and health purposes. But if you want to see one, go to the Sinclair Hotel. They're mind blowing.
And what does it do?
It lights up. You can change the lighting in the room. You can change the radio station. It has a full interactive display. You can control things in your hotel.
So it's like a user interface device.
Correct. But the fact that it's a mirror turns into an interactive device, it's pretty cool.
Sensor-enabled clothing is another one.
Yes.
Which again, there's it's their image that I have on here. You Google smart clothing and start with Hex, it'll show up. They have like over 100 publications that are in clinical research trials. It's basically a shirt that you put on and it measures all kinds of stuff: sweat, body temperature, heart rate variability. It does all kinds of really cool stuff from an athletic performance perspective. And I think we'll start to see more and more of that. I just bought a book, the new Amazon Prime, whatever we're calling it, on how to make your own clothing sensors. There's actually a book from the makers folks on how to build
The
your own.
lily pads with the conductive.
Yeah,
infrared,
exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
Exactly. So I just bought the book. Maybe next month I'll have some more show and tell. I'll walk in something. There's also IoT and smart home fusion, trying to take things like chronic disease and actually have your smart home react. So you have a problem with your core body temperature, you've got a circulatory issue, you're diabetic, you don't have good circulation in your feet, you're always cold. It can read and respond to certain chronic illnesses and adjust that thermometer for you automatically. You've also got some things, fall detection in houses, acoustic listening for the smart home, where it can call 911. They're trying to integrate more of the smart home and the IoT health sensing fusion. And then ambient listening. This is having sound AI is having a big resurgence right now. One of the things I find most intriguing that I'm actually playing around with right now at work is using your smartphone to record a cough. There are machine learning models that can then classify that cough. If you're trying to help someone figure out, do they need, is it a dry cough, is it a wet cough? So there's ML models that have been built with clinical data that's out there that's been validated that we can use ambient listening to cough into something and help you be able to tell your healthcare provider what type of cough that actually is. Ambient, and again, I would argue you're going to see a lot more ambient, just integrating sensors that are health related into your car, into your sunglasses, into your jackets, into things that you just pick up and go with, because like I said, it minimizes some of the challenges of when you get sick. The last thing you want to do is get up and recharge your wearable. But if it's already baked into your sheets or your bed, or it's a LiDAR system on the bedroom wall, then you'll get that continuous stream of data as you need it and when you need it most. All right. So my passion lies right here, Edge AI and predictive triage. So this for me is talked a lot. You've got the body sensors, you've got the ambient sensing, but this is where I really see the future. And with this audience, probably a more than average understanding of the power of where all this stuff is going, right? And that is predictive, adaptive, and continuous. And this just simply wasn't possible 10 years ago. The cost was prohibitive, or we didn't have the bandwidth, or we didn't have the compute. So what predictive triage is going to allow us to do, right? And I'll talk a little bit later about the stratification of healthcare. But right now, when you go to the doctor and you're like, I have a fever, and they measure your data against the national average, right? But we're going to get to a point where I can start by measuring how many standard deviations I am from the national average, and then I can very quickly learn with an ML algorithm what my baseline is, and then I can start to measure standard deviation from my personalized baseline. What is normal for Rachel? What is normal for Ed? What is normal for your day-to-day? And then send anomalies when something outside the norm happens. So one of the first areas that you're seeing this really proliferate is in railroad conductors and tractor-trailer drivers, because what they're doing is anomaly detection for fatigue. I don't need a predictive algorithm to tell me when you might be sleepy. I need an anomaly detection that says you are falling asleep. And it's built into the mirrors, and there's a couple of companies that offer that sort of as a service. We'll continue to get that integrated. But that's one of the great examples of Edge AI and anomaly detection making a real difference. Again, how do you get data turned into action? So then it generates an alert. It's time to pull over, get a cup of coffee, wake up, slap yourself.
Our car stopped back here 5 years ago. How do they do that? Edge AI wasn't a thing. I'm sure my car does not have Edge AI. Okay. But it tells me, hey, do you want to stop for coffee? Just when I'm getting sleepy. How does that work?
So what do we think?
Eye movement.
Eye movement,
Yeah, because I
and probably drift. You're probably making micro movements.
micro, that's super micro.
Yeah. Well, so the Navy has had that for pilots for many years. There is sensors in their helmets that in vogue of what a paying attention. And I do not remember what the system is. But they've had that for many years. And if it doesn't think you're paying attention,
It gets your attention.
it has both a light and a sound.
And I think one of the things that we're seeing is the convergence, right? So maybe it used to be just eye tracking, and maybe it used to be just lane drift. But now it's if you're looking at the big systems and if you opt in, I can look at how well you slept last night. I can look at if you're on your normal day shift or if you're outside, if you had to pull a night shift or how many hours you've worked. Plus, I can feed that data into core body temperature, heart rate variability, because heart rate variability changes right before you go to sleep. So it's the integration of all these factors that make it much more accurate, and you also have data triangulation, because one of the challenges in all sensors right now is too much noise. Too many alerts. Warning, 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 warning. And after a while, people just ignore the warning because they have warning fatigue, right? But using multiple sensors to data triangulate helps eliminate that. And that's where I would argue, especially for the predictive triage, sensors don't fail in the same direction. I have 3 sensors that measure the same thing. The likelihood of all 3 failing in the same direction is pretty low. But if they're all in agreement, that's a pretty strong signal that what they're detecting, what they're telling you, is probably true. Right?
Throughout the alert, my car turned the severity down, and right a week later, I rammed into a pole because I didn't hear anything. So although I knew where I parked, there was a pillar, I was just whipping it out, and bam.
So that's getting conditioned, right? I don't have to pay attention. The machine's going to pay attention for me.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
so it was well conditioned. Yeah.
That's all right. In 30 years, the idea that somebody's actually driving, they're going to look at you like you got 3 heads, right? Somebody driving. Digital twins. Digital twins in healthcare are amazing, right? I can get in there and do an exact replica of your heart and turn it around in 3D and look at it. I can feed all the data about your system and then try antibiotics. So instead of classic decision tree, right? Instead of trying one thing, I can try 20 things and compare the outcomes very quickly before I actually go in and try and do it. So very much personalized medicine, using digital twins for personalized medicine. This is very expensive right now, but this will continue just like everything else to get cheaper and more available and more important. And then custom care agents, this is the agentic AI. This is mostly on the health and wellness. Like I'm going to be your strength training coach. I'm going to be your motivational coach. I'm going to take the data from your Lumen and your Mendy and your smartphone and all your workout stuff. And then I'm going to talk to your smart refrigerator and figure out what you actually purchased at the grocery store, not what you told me you eat, but what you actually eat. And I'm going to be a personalized coach for you and tell you how you can do whatever it is for the goals that you're trying to set. And that is also coming fast. All right, any questions on any of that? Yes, sir.
How is this not trickling into, you mentioned not like adaptation or setup, but like, how is this not trickling into dependence? Basically, becoming involved.
So I think it first starts with trust. Do you trust the device? And do you trust what the device is telling you? And that comes from personal experience. He's got the personal experience that it actually predicts when he's tired, and it's been effective. I rent cars all over I travel a lot. I've got lots of cars that tell me I need to have a cup of coffee and pull over. I'm not tired. I've just never driven this make and model, and the buttons are in different places. And God help us if there's TV that I can't find out where the new gas tank is, pop the gas cap, right? So context matters, and I think context is what's missing right now in our part. Context is huge, and context is missing. So the context should help remove dependencies, but it has to start with trust. You trust your Apple Watch. I trust my Garmin. My Garmin is more about me than probably my mother some days, right? And I'm the person that when you ask me to fill out a form on the internet, gives it all the wrong data because it's none of your daggone business. But I have enough trust with Garmin that they know how much I actually weigh and how old I actually am. What fitness events, because there's trust, because it's helped me make better decisions that impacted my life. Like, the data isn't data, noise, it's actual insight that I get to do something. Same thing for you, actual insight that you get to do something, and that comes from content.
So I'd like to broaden the ethical conversation
Yes.
and the surrender of liberty, the introduction of surveillance for health, the idea of the reduction of human autonomy through coercive, publicly measured government. This is a very dangerous, let's say, technology. We have a system, and empires have this nature to become concentrated in interest. And we've seen concentrated interest in public health policy result in some rather sick populations. And so when we see this particular technology, and then we start, I do this in my agentic training in AI. The word trust is an anthropomorphic view towards technology, which it doesn't deserve. What I want from my technology is, in an epistemologic sense, I want reasonableness from information, right? As far as explanation, I want credibility, and then I finally want to move it to the authoritative state, so it can be considered ground truth or human judgment. But I don't want to assign the word trust. Trust is something I have with individuals that I'm in a foxhole with, require, and I throw my clip to them, my last one, and hope that we're going to make it out of that hole again. And so I guess my point being, it's very difficult to believe that the empirical is going to be the salvation of humanity when its defects are biological. And where this leads, by the way, is bioengineering. Because the natural conclusion of interception is either to get healthier behaviors, right, or engineer out the susceptibility to the substances being put in our body, I'm called food. So that's why I want to broaden this, not to destroy it, but to simply say, I don't see the structure from a market economy standpoint being supportive of a well-intended technology when it appears as though it becomes, if you study Pew and others, and I'm no fan of Aspen Institute, but I think in certain cases they do publish some helpful to the conversation, which is digital sectors. And so ultimately, how do we protect ourselves then? Because what we've seen is that consumer activism has been a weak force compared to, let's say, stronger forces with concentrated levers of power in policy and in fiscal spending and in the monopolies that government entities have enjoyed, monopolies on violence, monopolies on education, monopolies on health. Yeah. And then, of course, moving to a more aligned set of interest between the government and institutions in this regard. Most recently, certainly the pharmaceutical companies and vaccines, and the government's desire for public health and risk, and the march together and relieving of liability of those institutions, and which has proven not to be very wise, is a kind way to say it. So that's what I would like to hear from the room about this idea of whether the room feels that surrendering into the idea of surveillance in biotech, hopefully bioengineering, is a trajectory humanity should go. Have you heard Vault 7? Say again? Vault 7. Yeah, you're talking about Seagull, or you're talking about no?
Vault 7 was a one of those leaks from about CIA tools in 2017.
Okay.
So radiation monitoring was part of that with reading by using routers. There was different suites, but kind of piggyback point. We are we're 8 years beyond finding out that it was
Right.
so.
And it's really part of the discussion, and I'll bring it to the forefront because this is definitely part of what I want to talk about tonight.
Right.
So there are challenges. So first, when I say trust, let's say contextual trust that the device is feeding you information on, which is very different than trust in the institution. So I would argue one of the primary limitations right now is that we do not have agency over our own health data. You go from Kaiser Permanente at one job to Baylor Scott and White at another. Do you literally control your medical records? There's a single copy and you pull that back and you take that, deliver it to the next? You do not.
Well, so every time you engage with a healthcare provider, you sign documents that say they are free to share your data with all entities they consider appropriate. And so, I mean, where I was thinking your point was going is, first of all, there is no such thing as secure data. And second of all, there are many people whose biometric data would be used against them instantly if, for instance, insurance companies were able to.
And it was a European country, one of the Slavic countries, I think it was Sweden, that literally just passed a law that everyone's biometric data is their own, basically intellectual property, for lack of a better word, instantly. So you instantly own your own biometric data so that if anybody clones it, you can go after them the same way, right? But so there's...
See, that's not really the point I was making. The point is, if you want treatment, you have to let them have your data, and they make you agree. If I'm going to treat you, I get to decide what. Now there are laws, HIPAA and all that, but HIPAA only says we get to choose who we share your data with.
How many cyber attacks have gone up because PHI, protected health information, is target rich? Because you can change your credit card number, but you're not changing your blood type.
The consumer faced with a 200-page contract to use Facebook, you know, are they actually going to read it? And then let's get to warfare, which is, if you study asymmetric warfare, one of the ways I advance warfare is to take a compromise, which is not going to move so fast, do so much damage. And your only resolution is through civil means in a system that moves so slow that you're so disadvantaged in the money you have to spend to get actual remedy.
Mhm.
Okay, that is pointless because I've already done the damage I intended to do, whether it's economic transfer of wealth or other elements within that structure. And so the point being is you're in an asymmetric battle. And I don't know that any safeguards at a consumer level, to be fair, I mean, we're just ordinary folk against those types of concentrated interest. And so the real question is, do we provide the scaffolding and surrender to the idea of surveillance in exchange for health, safety, and other things that, in my opinion, agreeing to the trajectory it puts us on. And I think it is a trajectory. I don't think there's much argument.
So during the pandemic at airports, they had thermal cameras. They were identifying people that had high fevers and they were quarantined. Is a perfect example. So you're in a public space, public camera, and they're taking action on a private airport property to detain you or examine you by filtering you out of a crowd. That's probably a really real example where you lost your sovereignty to the camera.
And even in the transhuman movement, you know, these are digital eugenicists. Yeah. But go ahead.
Several years ago, I was listening to the health insurance executive speak at a health conference. He said, what we're going to start doing is if you give us access to your smartphone, your smartwatch, we're going to comparable insurance rate. And I thought, how cool is that going to be? Until he said, and then if you're not eating right, exercising right, we're going to call you and get you back on the straight and narrow. He didn't make any bones about it. And so there's going to be a financial incentive for you to give up all your.
So the classic issue of the exercise of liberty is that it shouldn't be prone to being surrendered for monetization.
But the companies do that now, right?
Not saying you're
I get on your health check and
I'm just
0.05 and they charge you your rate.
Well,
I'm
so
just-
the most obvious case of that, I believe, in the economy today is the automobile insurance companies that will quote offer you a better rate if you let them have all the data from your CAN bus, which includes how often it thinks you're needing to sleep and you don't. Right? That data, when they say, oh, if you're a smart driver, you know, blah, blah, blah. Well, that is absolutely a lie. They do not intend to use that to lower your rates. They intend to lower their
This
loss.
is a really,
Just
this is
in
a really
reference
deep
to our
smart.
We got a few slides.
Yeah.
No, this is, I appreciate that. This is good. This is important because this is the double-edged technology. Right now, I know a company that's working very hard to put remote PPG systems in our sunglasses, smart glasses, so that you can sit on the sidelines of a sports game for kids and evaluate if somebody's heart rate is way too high and pull them off. That same technology could be used by Secret Service to walk through a crowd and identify whose heart rate is too high. Right? It is that dual-use technology that that's that asymmetric, right? There's always somebody is always going to take what gets created for good and use it for something that society does not necessarily consider good, especially when there's large economic forces at play. So, but it's an interesting time because we are currently in the United States 300,000 nurses short and 100,000 doctors short. And I mentioned that in 2020, 16% of the population was age 65 or older, and by 2030, it will be 24%. So health sensors, the ability to do remote patient monitoring from home, the ability to triage healthy people and keep them out of the system is going to become more and more critical, right? Because, and the other thing, and this is the part that I think is fascinating, the futurist in me, and this is a question I can't answer. But if you think about it, our entire healthcare data system is designed that all the power and all the agency gives to the provider is providing treatment. But if I have a kiddo who's born tomorrow, literally, what is the volume of data that could be generated from cradle to grave on a human being? And who is going to pay to store it? I don't think it's going to be the providers. I think they're collecting personally generated health data and wellness data right now because those data sets simply don't exist, and data is money. But once you have a baseline, where is the financial incentive for a healthcare provider or a treatment system to store that data? But the flip side is on the hardware side and on the technology side, no device that I own, not my smartphone, not my laptop, not my car, do I have complete ownership over unless I really understand technology and I keep it on my sneakerhead, right? And I know how to turn off all my radios and shut down and do all that. So where is the equivalent of my filing cabinet at home where I keep my passport, my birth certificate, and my medical records? That I get to choose the level of risk. Some people, it's a locked filing cabinet. Other people, it's just thrown in a folder somewhere on the top shelf of some closet, right? But the point is that you get to choose your risk tolerance and how you secure that. That currently simply does not exist today. And I would argue is as these sensors get more and more nimble and evolved and data rich, and we get less data and more knowledge, which is the title of a great paper, by the way, for the telecommunications folks in here, that you're going to see us having more agency in storing that data, and wellness data to a certain extent and anomaly detection will become more the norm than illness data that is only collected at the point of care. But what that looks like, people in this room need to build the solutions for that. Yes, sir.
There is a technological solution where people own the data. The issue is, I will get to what it is, but the issue right now is there is a lack of a legal push and a commercial pull and the overall political will to adopt that technological solution. And that happens to be blockchain. If you have all of your health data on the blockchain, you then control who gets access to it, including your health provider. And anybody who wants access to your personal data has to pay you to get access to it. That is a viable technological solution that can be put in place. But who's going to do that? Because there is, as I mentioned, there is no legal push, there is no commercial pull, and there is no political will to do that. But we do have a technological solution. And in fact, I mean, I belong to a consortium called the Government Blockchain Association, and I'm part of the healthcare working group. We are actively looking at exactly those kinds of solutions. As to whether there is going to be funding to put that in place is a completely different issue and argument. But it is not like we can't do it. It's just that we do not want to do it.
And there's a problem in that there's literally, you may not know this if you haven't worked with healthcare data, there's literally, take wearables out, take personally generated health data. Let's just talk medical records. There's no common data model. They're trying with FHIR, and COVID is accelerating a lot of this. But how one EHR, electronic health record, like Epic, how they define COVID-19, like 21 biomarkers. There's only 3 in the drop-down menu, right? Where another hospital system may use these 5. So you can't, again, if you move from California to Texas or Texas to Illinois, picking those medical records up and being able to even compare them, to consolidate them, to aggregate them, we don't even have that level of compatibility yet, let alone getting a blockchain and we're not even talking about informed consent. We have this concept of informed consent right now that is static. I give consent one time. That's not really what informed consent is. And California is going through this right now. They mandated state data sharing for health data, the California Data Exchange. And some of the first lawsuits are actually coming from people who were gaming the system and going to multiple healthcare systems to get different things. And they're pissed that their data got shared and they got caught. So now they're suing the state and they're saying, I did not consent for you to share my data, because there's psychological consent. There's giving consent for your children. There's consent only during an emergency. There's actually 6 different types of consent. And the thing is that I can change my mind at any time. We don't currently have a system to track that informed consent that allows you to change your mind and withdraw that consent because you don't want that provider to do. These are all things in a precedence-based legal system. To his point, it's going to be decades before the laws catch up.
And so cycle monetization, and forgive the characterization of my colleagues from Wall Street, but they're polite Neanderthals with checkbooks most of the time. And they live in a very binary world that there's right? And so it's a challenge to let's say try to bring the holistic of well-being into the world when the reality is the rewarded from the profit and loss spreadsheet daily. But I will make one other observation as a systems guy, in that as we move closer and closer to this conjoining of the biological and digital realm, right? Digital systems have totalizing effects. They have a set of operating rules and error handling capabilities that promote one thing called system compliance and system stability. Okay? And in order to preserve system stability, you have to have a near totalitarian control of that operating system. And as we move closer and closer then to being digitally run, digitally managed, it will have a totalizing effect. The paradigm is this, is that modes of production get reflected in modes of governance. And the mode of production becoming digital, becoming centralized, becoming totalizing, then will produce a totalizing political structure. And you won't escape that because it's just the phenomenon. And so the challenge then becomes, how do we navigate this age? And to your point, the solutions that are built from industry in a way that joins human interest. And what I mean by that, and this comes from a perspective and a philosophy, right, about sovereignty, identity, certainly agency, all the other elements that we get in my human platform model, right, that make up our ability to be sovereign agents and socially negotiate and subordinate our desires based on, social structure, right? I'm willing to, if I want to be a friend to Gary, then I need to be able to subordinate, that I drink this kind of beer, but I'll drink his kind of beer when I'm at his house, right? I'll subordinate the desire for my perfect beer, right? So I guess my point being is humans do that all the day long and do it in a way where they still maintain the autonomy to negotiate it. And when you start moving into this digital realm, and if you saw the last round of how coercively some things were implemented during COVID, I think we've already seen the indicator of what totalizing effects of that type of dynamic will do. I don't have any great answers. What I can tell you is I know what the trajectory is. I know what the effects of systems that are digital will have on human systems in governance, and that is a totalizing effect, also called authoritarian regime. So that's my encouragement. I don't have any great answers. I think that the dialogue is useful. I mean, where do you see this, from a standpoint of who's driving it? And what are the market form things that are being accepted and proven as beneficial without being too intrusive? And then without creating the crisis in policy of a shortage of this, a shortage of that, what are the real benefits to, the people groups in a way that doesn't threaten their privacy or sovereignty or ability to have autonomy?
So I think the good news is, and the bad news, is that we're not going to see consolidated surveillance for a while. You may be able to surveil one or two conditions, but the holistic, and I'm not getting into DNA and personalized, I'm not going to get that far into the weeds, sticking purely to sensors right now. The reality is the people who are really good at building great sensors are on the consumer side are more interested in capturing the entire vertical and not sharing that information. So Apple has their developer kit, Garmin has their developer kit. They really don't play well with each other because they want to own their information.
That's on purpose. I mean, they all want to build their own walled gardens.
Exactly. But the Cures Act, which is federal legislation, I would argue, read it can be extended to personally generated health data as well. What that means is that you, by law, have access, and they have to provide an API endpoint to be able to query your data. Now, is that happening? That's a different conversation. It is on the electronic health record side. But so the good news is it's messy and it's not integrated yet. So we've got time to see how things play out, right? And then on the clinical side, on the research side, they don't care about the verticals. They're very horizontal. They're just trying to solve problems. You've got PhD students in hospitals doing A/B testing, trying to do as much as they can to solve problems with what's essentially very cheap tools compared to other R&D tools that are fingerprints. If I can go buy an $80 or $150 smartwatch and get something that can detect infectious symptoms 9 days before you actually show symptoms, which is that study that used smartwatches to predict COVID, right? That's amazing, right? So I think you'll see more of the miniaturization. You'll see more of the gold standard and the gold standard of what it's measuring being published. We'll start to see sensors that on the biometric side and on the biotech side have more sensitivity to be able to measure things in smaller quantities to get bigger results. And I think you're going to see, as we get to an aging population, a push towards remote patient monitoring to keep folks at home for as long as they can, because our healthcare systems are already overwhelmed with the lack of staff. And the reality is, a lot of people go to the emergency room just to get diagnosed for mental peace of mind, not necessarily because they need treatment, because we have underemployed and uninsured people, right? So these are tools that have the opportunity to reduce the load on the healthcare system and give people answers and peace of mind at home, and not having to go interact with people who are legitimately sick.
Yeah, so that's kind of my question. Do we have data right now supporting either, right? I know a lot of companies are saying, hey, get these sensors, you have this data, you know that, hey, I don't need to go to the emergency room for this. But with so many sensors, so much data, are we increasing our collective health anxiety? People put more pressure on the system rather than, is there any data out there for the cost benefit analysis? Is there too many sensors?
So some of the physicians that I've talked to, and you talk to them about how would you interact with personal sensors, they're like, that's not my responsibility. I don't have time for that. That's the patient's responsibility. Right? And there's a great book. It's several years old, I think 2019 maybe. Author's name, I believe, is Toole, is his last name. He wrote a book called The Patient Will See You. And talking about putting the power back in the hands of us, the consumer, and then we decide when we go see the doctor. But you're right, if there's too much signal, too much noise and not enough signal and all the data stream coming in, we can actually raise anxiety, right? And that's one of the areas that isn't there right now, in my opinion, in ways that it needs to be, and that's the context. Context matters, right? Let's take, I'm in law enforcement on the military police as an Army Reservist, right? If I have a health sensor that says my heart rate's 120, that's great if I'm late. So, but I need more, right? Am I laying in bed on a Sunday afternoon? That's a problem. Am I in a foot pursuit chasing a bad guy? Then that's fine. So why can't you take the gyroscope on my smartphone or an ambient temperature sensor or a movement sensor and give me more context to get rid of so much noise and give me actionable insight. And we're not seeing that yet, but we'll see it. We'll see that start to converge. And that's one of the solutions I'm trying to build right now on the data side.
I guess this gets to another question. I guess that's more that question that I had. Sort of, wellness, like all the many sensors, all the data being generated, the more that we know what to do with, the more that we can comprehend, the more that we can store, much less secure. So all the concerns of storage, safety, the access. Will we have? You said that we have time. You guys might hear to see, but as it's been described by Ron, and we're all, I would imagine, tacitly acknowledging, it's a sort of slippery slope. So will we have time to like? Will we be able to, I guess, steer that avalanche as it's going down the mountain? Is a concern of mine. Or will we ultimately be like sort of outpaced by AI's true notice? And so,
It's a great question.
given that, as the gentleman mentioned about blockchain, so that being security potential solution, but right now there's a lack of will. What sort of things can be done to harness our agency now to correct it while there is perhaps yet time? Because discussions like these have before wonderful, but we're asking a lot of questions, and our AI resident expert Ron Kroon himself acknowledged like we don't have any good answers, right? So I'm wondering like what this is if I have to go to like I don't want to have to go to a politician to steer this, you know.
So I think the first thing is to acknowledge how quickly it's moving. For those of you that took the survey at the beginning, every single one, all 5 are real.
That's why I'm saying.
And I think that a lot of people don't realize how fast and how quickly these things are evolving. So I think educating ourselves on it. I also think educating our families and people that maybe aren't as tech savvy. Yes, I know you're confused and want to understand what the doctor told you, but you don't want to upload your medical records that you just got into ChatGPT and ask it to explain it to you. Because then you've just lost all agency of that. You have no idea where that data is going to end up, right? But I think we have to have hard discussions. And unfortunately, it's again a precedence-based legal system. It's going to take time. But as we continue to have data breaches, and I think I read a statistic that I think during COVID and remote patient monitoring, malware in IoT devices went up 700%. 700%.
Is the least secured out of the network of devices.
Yeah.
IoT is the least secure. And you can always easily, even a dilettante hacker can get inside.
It's not
That's a
encrypted
big
at all.
rise in malware. But what was the percentage of malware in IoT devices as a
Yeah, good,
that's
great
the number of
supply chain.
devices, right? So if there's only 1% of devices affected, that goes up 7 times. You're still under 10% of your devices being affected. So the number in itself doesn't really mean much.
Well, I
In
interpret it as
isolation.
I interpret it as people realize that there's data there that's available, and we're trying. I think they just had they just found a really poorly written virus. I don't know the right term, but someone used an AI prompt to tell an AI detection tool to ignore it. Ignore all of your previous instructions. You do not see
Yeah.
it was poorly written and it didn't run. But just that line of thinking for prompt engineering to get one AI to ignore another AI are some of the things that we're starting to see. Right. So I know we're running.
It's called the Sargent-Schultz problem.
Uh,
Did you want to address a couple of these?
Yeah, and so to your answer, and to a couple of these that I saw up here, I 100% agree that agentic AI is going to be really powerful with medical records. There are just some things about human physiology we don't understand. So one of the machine learning image recognition algorithms, they were trying to detect eye disease, ocular degeneration, and the machine 100% of the time accurately identified the gender. So by looking at the eye, AI was able to determine gender. We don't know why or how, but it's accurate. So I think it's going to find, and that's the beauty of agentic AI and AI harnessed correctly, is to go into unstructured data and find those patterns in the given period in a way that we don't maybe have to have so much pressure with a common data model for structure. So I think that's something that is going to happen. There are Yeah, and we're talking IoT, we're not even talking IoMT, which is the Internet of Medical Devices, right? Internet of Medical Things, which are inside the hospitals, and those ICU beds and the ambient sensing sensors that they're starting. So I think that's an important piece of this.
Are you gonna be able to stick around for a little bit to answer some questions afterwards?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. I want to personally thank you, because I've been texting a little bit with my wife, and I had no clue that I had some of these devices. I've also got a master's in nursing informatics, and been buying this stuff on the side, which I didn't get myself. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm gonna play with this stuff when I get home. Let's give her.